Jim Kelly did not need too many lines to become a legend. He only needed to step into the frame with his afro, his cold stare, and the look of a man who knew he was born to look effortlessly cool. If you have ever watched Enter the Dragon, you surely remember Williams, the black man standing beside Bruce Lee, never overshadowed, never needing to shout, never needing to beg for a place, carving himself into martial arts cinema memory with only a few kicks and one line. But the strange thing is, when Jim Kelly passed away in 2013, the story around him did not explode the way he once stepped onto the screen. No red carpet, no grand Hollywood-style farewell. And then a question began to spread. Why did many faces from Enter the Dragon not appear publicly at his memorial? Was it indifference, a turning away, or simply a misunderstanding that the internet turned into an accusation? The deeper one follows the traces, the more complicated the story becomes. Some had died before him. Some lived quietly. Some were not mentioned by the media. But there were also people who truly were there. And behind that rumor was a larger truth. Jim Kelly was not only questioned at his funeral. Perhaps he had been forgotten by Hollywood long before that. Let us look back at the life, the career, and the truth behind the coldest suspicion surrounding the legend of Enter the Dragon. The door closed in Louisville. Before Jim Kelly stepped onto the screen with the careless poise of a legend, he once stood before a very different door, the door of the stadium. No cameras, no Bruce Lee, no pounding martial arts music behind him. Only a black young man born on May 5, 1946 in Millersburg, Kentucky, carrying within him the energy of a born athlete. Football, basketball, track, and field, Jim Kelly did not merely play sports. He almost belonged to them. His body was trained to charge forward, to compete, to win. And then the University of Louisville appeared like a ticket to a different life, a football scholarship, a legitimate path out of the limits of a small town. For many young people, that was the dream. For Kelly, it could have been the future. But that future cracked very early. Kelly left the school after witnessing a coach display a racist attitude toward a black teammate. Just one moment, but enough for him to see the bitter truth of America. At the time, talent could bring a black man onto the playing field, but it did not necessarily give him the right to be respected. So what did Jim Kelly do when the door of sports closed? He found karate. At first, it may have been only a martial art. But for Kelly, karate quickly became a new language, a language that did not need permission, did not need explanation, did not need to bow its head. Every punch, every kick, every training session in the dojo was like a way for him to take back control of his own fate. By the early 1970s, Jim Kelly was in Los Angeles, opening his own dojo and making a name for himself in the martial arts world. In 1971, he won a title at the Long Beach International Karate Championships, an important milestone that meant he was no longer merely a martial artist with a striking appearance, but a real fighter. But Los Angeles was also a place where light and shadow stood very close together. On the outside, Hollywood needed new faces. On the inside, that door was still narrow for black actors who wanted to become action heroes, not supporting roles standing on the sidelines. Jim Kelly understood that. He did not just want to be famous. He wanted to break an invisible wall, and the opportunity came in a very cinematic way, not from a carefully prepared plan, but from an unexpected gap. Just a few days before the Enter the Dragon crew left for Hong Kong, the role of Williams needed a new face. They came to Jim Kelly's dojo. They saw a man with technique, presence, charisma, and a kind of cool that could not be taught through acting. And so a young man from Kentucky, who had once lost one path because of racism, stepped into the greatest martial arts film of Bruce Lee's life.
But no one knew that after that spotlight, Jim Kelly would then have to face another kind of silence. The kind of silence that many years later still makes people ask, did Hollywood truly remember him, or did it only remember the image that had once made it money?
The man who wanted to break the color barrier, Jim Kelly did not enter cinema with the dream of standing beside Bruce Lee. His ambition at first was bigger, more direct, and far bolder. He once told the Los Angeles Times that his goal was to get into movies, become famous, make money, and then use that fame to inspire young people regardless of color, nationality, or background. At first, it sounds like a very Hollywood dream. Lights, fame, money posters hanging outside theaters. But for Jim Kelly, behind that dream was something deeper. He did not only want to be seen. He wanted to change the way people saw a black man on screen, because Hollywood at the time did not lack heroes. But black heroes were far too rare. On American screens in the early 1970s, black people were still often trapped inside familiar frames, supporting roles, comic roles, gangster roles, victims, or characters written to serve someone else's story. But a black man entering the frame with the posture of someone in control, a man who did not beg for recognition, did not need anyone to save him, did not need to bow his head before a white leading character, that was still something Hollywood was not ready to give away too easily. Jim Kelly understood that gap, and he believed martial arts could be the key. Karate gave him something dialogue could not create: immediate power. When a real martial artist steps into the frame, his body tells the story before his mouth even has time to speak. The way he stands, the way he looks, the way he keeps distance from his opponent. All of it sends a signal that this person is not decoration in the shot. This person has weight. In 1971, Kelly won the middleweight title at the Long Beach International Karate Championships. This was not just a trophy, it was proof. Proof that he was not an actor who had learned a few moves to look like a fighter. He was a real fighter. A man who had sweated in the dojo, competed, won, and built credibility with his own fists and discipline. Then cinema began knocking on the door. In 1972, Kelly was hired to teach karate to actor Calvin Lockhart in the film Melinda. At first, he only stood behind the camera as a technical trainer, a martial arts expert, helping another actor become more convincing. But there are people who are born unable to remain backstage forever. When the camera saw Jim Kelly, it did not only see a man teaching martial arts. It saw a face, a stance, a presence, and so he was brought into the film as a martial arts instructor. That moment was small, but it was like the first crack in the Hollywood wall. Cinema did not invent Jim Kelly. Cinema only happened to encounter him when he already had everything a star needed: real skill, real charisma, real experience, and a very real urge to become the image that black boys out there had not seen often enough on screen. But Hollywood has always had a strange habit. It only opens the door wide when it realizes someone can bring in profit. And only 1 year after Melinda, that door opened in a way so unexpected, it felt as if fate had written the script itself. A role in a martial arts film needed a replacement. A film crew was preparing to fly to Hong Kong. A legend named Bruce Lee was waiting at the center of the story. Jim Kelly did not yet know that he was about to step in to Enter the Dragon. And he also did not yet know that from that moment on, he would not only break through a door, he would become living proof of what Hollywood had once tried to delay, that a black man too could step into a martial arts film stand, amid punches, blood fame, and contemptuous stares, and make the whole world remember his name. The unexpected strike in Enter the Dragon. There are opportunities in life that do not knock twice. For Jim Kelly, it did not even knock politely. It almost burst straight into his dojo right before a film crew was preparing to fly to Hong Kong. In 1973, Enter the Dragon was not just an ordinary martial arts film. It was a cinematic gamble between America and Hong Kong, between Warner Brothers and the exploding world of kung fu, between Hollywood and an Asian star named Bruce Lee, who was standing before a moment that could change screen history. Directed by Robert Klaus, the film brought together Bruce Lee, John Saxon, Jim Kelly, Anna Capri, Bob Wall, and Shi Qian. But at that time, no one knew that this work would later become such a major cultural milestone that in 2004, the Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry, a list reserved for films of special cultural, historical, or aesthetic value. But before it became a legacy, Enter the Dragon once had a gap. The role of Williams did not originally belong to Jim Kelly. The person intended for it was Rocken Tarkington. But only a few days before the crew left for Hong Kong, Tarkington departed the project. An important role was suddenly left empty. And in cinema, gaps like that can sometimes ruin a film. But sometimes they also open the door for a legend to walk in. Producer Fred Weintraub heard about a dojo on Crenshaw Boulevard. There was a tall, powerful black man there with a striking afro, real karate technique, and more importantly, a kind of charisma that the camera always craves but can never teach presence. Weintraub came to watch Jim Kelly train. And almost immediately he understood that he had not merely found a replacement. He had found an image. The strange thing is that Williams is not the character with the most screen time in Enter the Dragon. If measured by minutes of appearance, he is not the center. If measured by plot position, Bruce Lee is the absolute soul of the film. John Saxon is the familiar Hollywood face representing American audiences, stepping into the mysterious world of Hans Island. And Jim Kelly, he is like an unexpected strike from a hidden angle, not appearing for too long. But every time he appears, the temperature of the frame changes. Williams enters the film like a character coming from many currents at once. He carries kung fu in his body, blaxploitation in his style, black pride in his eyes, and the entire cool aesthetic of the 1970s in every step. In a world where characters often have to say a great deal to prove they are dangerous, Williams only needs a few seconds of silence. That is the difference of Jim Kelly. Bruce Lee is a focused flame, sharp, disciplined like a martial arts philosophy shaped into a human form. John Saxon is the familiarity of Hollywood, calm, masculine, accessible to Western audiences. But Kelly is what the audience does not expect. A black martial artist who does not play a supporting role in the sense of standing behind someone else, who does not enter the film to be background, and who does not need anyone to grant him the right to be cool. He brings that right into the frame himself. And then came that line. When Williams faces Han's threat, he does not tremble, does not beg, does not try to prove his courage with a speech. He simply responds with an almost immortal arrogance. If failure comes, he will not notice, because he will be too busy looking good. At first it sounds like a funny line, but placed in Jim Kelly's body it becomes a declaration. A black man in American cinema in the early 1970s, standing inside an international martial arts film, looking straight at the most powerful man on the island, and saying that even if he loses, he will not lose his style. That is not only cool, that is the right to define oneself. And that is why Williams lives longer than his screen time. Audiences do not remember him only because of his kicks. They remember the hair, they remember the eyes, they remember the careless confidence. They remember the feeling that this character had just stepped out of another film, another world, another cultural wave, and then unexpectedly took over Bruce Lee's screen for a few brief moments. With only one film, Jim Kelly did not simply have the role of a lifetime, he had an image. The black man stepping into the intersection between Asian martial arts and white Hollywood, between commerce and cultural revolution, between entertainment and the desire for representation. He did not ask anyone's permission to become cool. But Hollywood has a cruel habit. It can turn someone into an icon very quickly, and then just as quickly not know what to do with that icon. And for Jim Kelly, the painful question is not why he shone in Enter the Dragon. The real question is, after he had shone so brilliantly, why was that light not kept alive longer after the spotlight? After Enter the Dragon, Jim Kelly was no longer the man whom the camera had accidentally discovered in a dojo on Crenshaw. He now had what Hollywood always hunts for, an image that could sell tickets. And Warner Brothers understood that very quickly. In 1974, Kelly was pushed to the center with Black Belt Jones. If Williams in Enter the Dragon was the kind of appearance that startled audiences, then Black Belt Jones was a declaration Jim Kelly could carry his own name on a poster. He was no longer just the cool black man beside Bruce Lee. He became the main character, a martial artist in stylish clothes defeating villains, walking through dangerous streets with the bearing of a man who had no intention of asking anyone's permission to exist. Then came Three the Hard Way, then Black Samurai. Those films placed Kelly inside the rising martial arts blaxploitation current of the 1970s, where funk music, wide-collared shirts, gleaming cars, karate, and the compressed anger of the black community mixed together into a very distinct kind of cinema. Many people later looked at blaxploitation with contempt, as if it were only a cheap film movement exploiting violence and style. But if we look more closely, we see something else. For many black audiences at the time, this was one of the rare moments when they could see characters like themselves no longer standing at the edge of the frame. They were not only the best friend of the main character, not only the joke, not only the victim waiting to be rescued. They fought back, they dressed well. They entered the room with the presence of people who owned the story. Jim Kelly stood right at the center of that feeling. If Bruce Lee broke the image of the small, weak Asian man whom Hollywood had underestimated, then Jim Kelly was doing something similar with the image of the black man on the action screen. He once said he had broken the color barrier, becoming the first black martial artist to rise to stardom in martial arts cinema. That was not boasting. It was the statement of a man who understood very clearly where he stood in history. But history can sometimes be very cruel to those who go first. Kelly did not have too many major films. His film career did not last in the way an icon like him should have had. But just a few roles were enough to create an image more lasting than box office revenue: the afro, the sharp kick, the confident smile, and the bearing of a black man who refused to bow his head. The problem is that Hollywood often loves icons. It loves packaging icons, selling icons, printing icons on posters. But Hollywood does not always know what to do with the real person behind that icon. Why did Jim Kelly disappear from Hollywood? If Jim Kelly once had Enter the Dragon, once had Black Belt Jones, once had Three the Hard Way, then why did he not become a long-lasting action superstar? That is the question that makes his story begin to change color. Because from the outside, everything seemed to have been arranged perfectly. A real martial artist, a face made for cinema, a presence that could not be copied, a cultural explosion after Enter the Dragon, a visual brand so clear that just mentioning Jim Kelly immediately makes people remember the afro, the karate kick, and the confident smile, as if he always knew he was taking over the entire frame. Hollywood should have known how to use someone like that. But then after a few films, that light began to fade. Not because Jim Kelly suddenly ran out of talent, nor because audiences forgot him immediately. The problem was far more complicated. In a 2010 interview with the Los Angeles Times, later mentioned by The Guardian, Kelly said he never left the movie business. That sentence is very important. It is like a belated correction to those who thought he had simply disappeared, quit the profession, or no longer wanted to stand in front of the camera. The truth is that he was still receiving scripts, but not the kind of scripts he wanted to do. Kelly once explained that many projects did not offer a positive image, so he turned them down. And here we begin to see the real tragedy of an icon ahead of his time. Hollywood may have wanted Jim Kelly's afro, wanted Jim Kelly's kick, wanted Jim Kelly's cool, but did Hollywood truly want to respect Jim Kelly as a person? An artist, an image representing something larger than box office revenue? That was the real cut. If he had accepted every role offered to him, perhaps Kelly's name would have appeared more often. But at what price? Becoming a cheaper version of himself, repeating forever the image of the cool black martial artist, stylish but hollow, or being pushed into roles that continued to exploit his body, his skin color, and his style. without giving the character any meaningful depth. Jim Kelly did not disappear because he no longer had value. He stepped back in part because he did not want his value to be used in the wrong way. And when cinema no longer opened a path worthy enough, he returned to another language of the body sports. Later, Kelly became a serious competitive tennis player, held a ranking in the senior system, and worked as a coach. This may sound like a side note in a biography, but in fact it says a great deal about who he was. Jim Kelly was not the kind of artist who only existed when there was a camera. He was someone who always needed movement, always needed competition, always needed an arena to prove his discipline. Tennis, in a way, was the quieter chapter of his life. No more funk music, no more villain on Hans Island, no more martial arts posters hanging outside theaters. Only the court, the racket training sessions, senior tournaments, and a man who had once exploded across the screen, now choosing a calmer rhythm of life. But he did not completely leave public memory. At fan conventions, people still recognized Jim Kelly, still asked for his autograph, still wanted to hear him repeat old lines, still saw him as Williams from Enter the Dragon, as Black Belt Jones, as part of a youth they did not want to lose. And yet that kind of love was both warm and sad, because it showed that Jim Kelly was still remembered, but often remembered as a framed image, rather than as an artist who should have been able to go much further. That is the most painful paradox. Hollywood once needed Jim Kelly to expand the audience's imagination, but after audiences had seen that a black man could step into a martial arts film with the posture of an icon, Hollywood did not continue building the bridge for him to cross. It left him standing there, brilliant in a few historic frames, then gradually receding to the margins. Jim Kelly was not erased completely, but Hollywood did not build him a road long enough for that icon to keep walking. A farewell, quieter than the spotlight. On June 29, 2013, Jim Kelly passed away in San Diego. He was 67 years old. There was no pounding music, no slow-motion shot, no scene of a martial artist stepping into the light, looking straight at his opponent and smiling defiantly. The man who once made the whole world remember Williams in Enter the Dragon left quietly at his home after a battle with cancer. The sad news was confirmed to the press by his ex-wife, Marilyn Dishman. The Guardian and The Independent later reported it. Jim Kelly, martial artist, actor, and icon of black martial arts cinema, had passed away. But what makes this story feel so choking is not only the death, it is the silence around that death. On screen, Williams was the kind of man who walked into danger as if walking into a party. When facing Khan, when death was already hovering very close, Kelly's character still kept his cold arrogance. No trembling, no retreating, no begging. A man who knew that sometimes style itself is a weapon. But in real life, Jim Kelly's final chapter did not look like that of a Hollywood legend. It was not as loud as the way Bruce Lee has been mentioned endlessly in martial arts history. It did not create a giant media wave. It did not become a grand memorial covering the entertainment press. Major newspapers such as the Los Angeles Times, The Guardian, and The Independent all reported the news, but most of them were obituaries, respectful, concise, recalling his career, recalling Enter the Dragon, recalling Black Belt Jones, and then closing the story. A man who once stood beside Bruce Lee in one of the most famous martial arts films in history was farewelled at a volume far smaller than the echo his image had once created. That is the painful paradox, because Jim Kelly was not an ordinary supporting actor. He was a cult icon. He was the face that made many black viewers for the first time see someone like themselves step into a martial arts film, not in the posture of a victim, not as decoration, but with beauty, strength, and an almost untouchable confidence. He did not have hundreds of major roles, but he had an image strong enough to live across generations. And yet when he died, the story was not told with the same magnitude, and it was precisely that gap that created a dark space. Fans began to look around. They asked who came, who did not come. Why were many faces from Enter the Dragon not seen publicly? Why did someone who had once been an icon seem to be farewelled so quietly? Those questions may at first have come only from regret. But on the internet, regret can very easily turn into suspicion. Suspicion can very easily turn into accusation. And accusation, if repeated often enough, begins to take the shape of truth. Jim Kelly's death, therefore, did not only close the life of a cinematic martial artist. It opened another gap, the gap between his real legacy and the way Hollywood remembered him. This silence was what created the empty space. And in the age of social media, empty spaces are rarely left alone. They are often filled with speculation. Where does the rumor begin to become dangerous? There is a very thin line between a reasonable question and a dangerous accusation. With Jim Kelly's story, that line lies in the word refused. If one says some later videos and posts raised questions about why many Enter the Dragon actors did not appear publicly at Jim Kelly's memorial, that is a question that can be checked. But if one says directly, the cast of Enter the Dragon refused to attend Jim Kelly's funeral, the story has stepped into a different zone. The zone of accusation. The zone that requires evidence. And also the zone that a great deal of content on the internet deliberately blurs in order to create drama. Because it must be admitted, this rumor sounds very attractive. Enter the Dragon was not a small film. It was a martial arts monument, the film that turned Bruce Lee into a global icon, a work that half a century later people still mention as a door opening a new era for action cinema. In such a major film, Jim Kelly was an image far too difficult to forget. He did not appear the most, but every time he appeared, it was like a strike against the audience's memory. The afro, the careless eyes, the cold voice, the presence of a man who needed no one's permission to become cool. So when he passed away, and the public did not see a grand Hollywood-style farewell, the question immediately appeared. Where were the people who had once stood beside him? But that very question begins to slide away from the truth when people confuse two very different concepts. The press did not report it, and no one came. This is the first trap. Not every funeral, not every memorial service is reported by major media with a full guest list like an awards ceremony. Especially for an artist like Jim Kelly, someone whose legacy was enormous in martial arts culture and blaxploitation, but who was no longer at the center of the mainstream Hollywood machine at the time of his death. The second trap is cinematic memory. Fans look at the Enter the Dragon poster and imagine that the cast was still intact. But by 2013, many important faces were no longer alive. Bruce Lee had died in 1973. Shi Qian died in 2009. Anna Capri died in 2010. Part of the cast that the public imagined had in fact already been taken by time before Jim Kelly passed away. The third trap is the nature of the memorial itself. Jim Kelly was not necessarily farewelled through a glossy Hollywood event with a red carpet cameras and entertainment outlets rushing to cover it. He was remembered in a space closer to who he truly was, the martial arts community, friends, family people, who understood his value not only as an actor, but as a fighter and a pioneering icon. And here there is one detail strong enough to shake the entire rumor. At the public memorial service on July 30th, 2013, Bob Wall, who played O'Hara in Enter the Dragon, was recorded as one of the speakers. That means at least one face from that very film was present to say farewell to Jim Kelly. This detail is not merely a small line of information. It is a piece of evidence that makes the word refused very dangerous if used as truth. Because not seeing everyone doesn't mean everyone turned away. Not appearing publicly does not mean refused. And not being named by the media cannot automatically become a story of betrayal. Therefore, if a headline says the cast refused, the body of the story must overturn that very headline. There is no reliable evidence for the word refused. There is no solid documentation showing that the cast of Enter the Dragon collectively turned their backs on Jim Kelly. On the contrary, what remains shows that the story is far more complicated. Some had died, some lived quietly, some were far away, some did not appear in the press, and at least one person truly was there. Rumors often do not need the whole truth to survive. They only need a dark enough empty space for people to imagine the rest themselves. The real memorial. If one only reads the lines of speculation online, one might imagine that Jim Kelly departed in loneliness. As if the man who once stepped in to Enter the Dragon with an unconquerable presence was ultimately left behind by the very world that had once celebrated him. But the truth of July 30th, 2013 carried a different color. In Los Angeles, inside the Barbara Morrison Performing Arts Center, an intimate memorial was held for Jim the Dragon Kelly. It was not the kind of glamorous Hollywood event with a red carpet, crowded reporters and stars, appearing only for the cameras to capture them. That service was smaller, closer, and perhaps also more real. It was led by Grandmaster Eric Lionman O'Neill, with the presence of family friends fans and the martial arts community people who did not only know Jim Kelly through posters, but understood him as part of a history they had lived with. The atmosphere that day was described through a very beautiful image, joy mixed with tears. It was the kind of farewell where people did not only cry because of loss, but also laughed because of memory. Laughed because of the old lines, because of the kicks that once made movie theaters erupt, because of the afro, because of the careless stance, because of a time when Jim Kelly appeared on screen and made many black people feel for the first time we too can be heroes. One of the most emotional moments came from his daughter, Sabrina Kelly Lewis. When she stood before the crowd, she did not only speak about a father, she spoke about a man who had a positive impact on many lives, one of the early role models for African American men. Her words reminded people that Jim Kelly was not only Williams, not only Black Belt Jones, not only a martial arts icon. To his family, he was a father. To the community, he was a milestone. To a generation of viewers, he was proof that the image of a strong, beautiful, self-possessed black man could absolutely stand at the center of the screen. And more importantly than anything else, he was not farewelled in emptiness. The people who were present or spoke that day were not meaningless names. There was Bob Wall, who played O'Hara in Enter the Dragon, a detail strong enough to shatter the narrative that the entire cast of the film had turned their backs. There was Fred the Hammer Williamson, his co-star in Three the Hard Way, another icon of black action cinema. There was Gloria Hendry, a face connected with Black Belt Jones. Then there were Frida Payne, Herbert Jefferson Jr., Robert Parham, Art Camacho, Eric Chen, Dr. Frank de Gourville, and many other figures from the worlds of martial arts, cinema, and entertainment. Looking at that list, what do we see? Not a man who was abandoned, but a man farewelled by the very community that understood him best. Not necessarily mainstream Hollywood, but the martial arts world. Not necessarily the major studios, but the people who had seen him open a path. Not necessarily stars appearing to create headlines, but friends, colleagues, students, fans, and people who had grown up with his image. Perhaps this is what makes the story bitter. Jim Kelly did not lack people who loved him. He lacked a media machine large enough to turn that love into a global spectacle. Because Hollywood often decides who is remembered loudly, who is mentioned again in a few lines of obituary, who gets a statue, and who only continues living in the memory of loyal fans. And with Jim Kelly, it seems that the industry did not give him a farewell equal to what he had once opened up. But to say he was abandoned is not correct. Mainstream Hollywood may not have organized a massive farewell for Jim Kelly, but his community was there. What did Hollywood do to the people who opened the way? The rumor about Jim Kelly's funeral, if looked at closely, is only the outermost hook of the story. It makes people angry, curious, even outraged. But behind the question of who came, who did not come, lies a much larger question. What did Hollywood do to the black people who once opened the way for the image of action heroes on screen? Jim Kelly did not appear in Enter the Dragon merely to serve as background for Bruce Lee. He brought into the film something that American cinema at the time still sorely lacked: the image of a black man who was strong, handsome, confident, dangerous, but not written as a joke or a victim. He once said Hollywood at that time did not have many black heroes, and he wanted to use martial arts to bring something different. That sentence sounds very simple, but placed in the 1970s, it feels like a challenge, because Hollywood at that time could accept a black person appearing on screen, but allowing that person to become the center of strength, style, and admiration was another matter. Jim Kelly stepped into exactly that empty space. He did not only kick beautifully, he represented a new possibility. Black people too could be action heroes, martial arts icons, figures who made white audiences, black audiences, Asian audiences, everyone have to look. But Hollywood is often very pragmatic with pioneers. When the blaxploitation wave was still hot, Jim Kelly had commercial value. His afro, his martial arts outfits, his presence, all of it became something that could be sold. Black Belt Jones, 3 The Hard Way, Black Samurai, those films proved that the market had room for him. But when that film movement weakened, when Hollywood no longer knew how to package him through the old formula, the door began to narrow. Kelly was still receiving scripts, but many roles did not offer a positive image, and he turned them down. That is the point that makes his story different. He did not disappear because he lacked talent, nor did he leave cinema because he had run out of desire. He stepped back because he did not want to be turned into a hollow version of himself. A black icon could be celebrated by Hollywood when he was still useful, but if that icon demanded depth, respect, and a more dignified image, the system was not always ready to answer. Therefore, Jim Kelly's tragedy is not the tragedy of a man who was not big enough. It is the tragedy of someone who was different enough to open a door, but lived inside an industry that only opened that door wide enough to exploit that difference. And that connects directly to the funeral story. When Jim Kelly passed away in 2013, he was no longer in the central orbit of mainstream Hollywood. His death was acknowledged by the press, remembered by the martial arts community, and fans, but it was not amplified the way Hollywood often does with A-list stars. That does not mean his colleagues were indifferent, but it reveals a sadder truth. Jim Kelly was remembered by the industry on a scale far smaller than what he had once opened up. Sometimes forgetting does not happen at the funeral. It begins decades earlier, when a star is reduced by Hollywood into an image that can sell tickets, and the real person behind that image is never given the chance to grow. Jim Kelly did not depart like a star farewelled by Hollywood with flares. He left more quietly, more modestly, almost in contrast to the very image that had once set the screen on fire. But that silence does not mean he was forgotten. It only reminds us that there are people who open the way, yet are never properly honored by the industry. Rumor can distort a funeral, but it cannot erase a legacy. If you still remember, William, still remember that stance, those eyes, leave a comment. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue looking back at the stories Hollywood once tried to tell too quietly.
We do not make any absolute claims regarding the accuracy of the data presented, and we are not responsible for any personal decisions made based on the content of this video. From the stage to the big screen, their influence is undeniable. Thank you for watching this tribute. If you enjoyed this walk through history, leave a like and subscribe to the Silent Legends archives. This video specifically recommended for you reveals a truth that few people talk about. Watch it now to see the full picture. Take care of yourselves.